It's time for Coffee with the Chicken Ladies, a podcast for people who love chickens.
Hey everybody and welcome. It's Chrisie&Holly from Coffee with the Chicken Ladies. We're here and this is episode number 224 of our podcast where we talk about everything chicken, family, fun, and
more chickens.
More chickens. We drink a ton of coffee. I'm talking a ton, but most importantly,
we hug chickens, ducks, and geese every day.
And we kiss them too, don't forget. We brew coffee from a little coffee roaster from Houston, Texas. Bright and early coffee. Holly, and what kind of coffee are we brewing today?
Hazelnut.
We love that hazelnut. It is delicious. And if you're not trying this coffee, you're missing out. We have a code. It's CWTCL 15 for 15% off a bagged coffee. Holly, where should everybody go?
brightandearlycoffee.com.
And if you need K-Cups, go over to Amazon and get them there and follow them on social media. Are you ready to sip some of this delicious hazelnut coffee and chat?
I am. But first, a word from our sponsor.
We have some exciting news to share from our sponsor, Grubbly Farms. They're here, new and improved, Grubbly's World Harvest.
I'm a longtime subscriber, and my flock love the healthy, nutritious treats, plus orders $40 and more ship free.
If you haven't heard, Grubbly's has a fantastic layer pellet and crumble feed. It's packed with plant and insect protein, perfect for those picky chickens and ducks.
Grubbly Farms makes food and treats for healthy pets and planet.
To support us and Grubbly Farms, use the link grubbly.co/coffee. Try it today. Okay, how are you doing?
I'm all right. Got some nice little seed starts, some broccoli and some cabbage I'll be planting out soon, which makes me feel like spring. How are you?
I'm hanging in there, recouping from a trip to Mexico.
Yeah.
The trip you're like every year, you're going to Mexico. Always fun.
Because I've never been to Mexico, so there are some things I would love to see there. But I'm not a resort kind of a gal, though.
It's nice to get away and just soak in some sun for a few days. Glad to be back and back on the mic and back at work. And thank you for handling the Backyard Chicken Summit while I was away.
Oh, that's right. You're most welcome.
It happened to be the same weekend last year.
Yeah. I'm noticing a trend here. A little pattern.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm hoping warm weather stays. In between, there's always a few days that are like super cold and you're like, oh God, it's like a tease. Yeah. Maryland is such a tease when it comes to weather. It's crazy.
And it never fails that we start cheering because it'll be blazing hot and we'll start cheering and then we'll get some cold nights. But it is what it is. We just have to get through it.
It's like one day you're freezing, one day it's beautiful. The next, and when it's hot, sometimes it's like, oh, it's going to cool down, and then you get another 100-degree day. But that's
right.
That's Maryland for you, you know.
It is. Yeah.
So March, we're close. We're a week away from St. Patty's Day, the luck of the Irish. Oh yeah,
that's what they say.
Are you lucky?
I'd say I'm pretty lucky, actually. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's good.
I'm not sure that that's an inherited trait, but yeah. In general, I'd say some good luck comes my way.
Good. And on that note, if you're listening to our show and you're loving it, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a written review. We love to read these reviews. You make our day. It's a zero-cost way of helping our show grow. It's just a few minutes to type down what you think about the show, especially if you like it. And hit that subscribe button for 2 reasons. They count them. They do. And you never miss any of the fun.
You're looking for other ways to help support the podcast, you can tell a few chicken, goose, or duck-loving friends about us. You can share your favorite episodes on social media. You can become a patron of the show, patreon.com/coffeewiththechickenladies. Thank you to our patrons, and welcome to our newest patrons. And the other thing you can do to help support the show is visit our website and our show notes, use our affiliate links and discount codes, and buy products from our sponsors.
Yay!
So, winter is coming.
It's better when Sean Bean says it.
Can you stay on topic for just a minute?
What topic?
Winter. Well, chickens, obviously. And igloo coops from Omelette.
Oh, yeah. You gotta have an igloo for winter.
If you don't know igloos, they're engineered for extremes. Double insulated, waterproof, and stormproof.
They keep out any weather and all predators.
And you can just wipe them clean.
My girls and little man are so comfy in their Igloo Pro.
Mine too. Warm and dry all year round.
Winter is coming.
Be ready with an Igloo.
Search Omelette. That's OMLET.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
Do you like monthly subscriptions?
Does it have anything to do with chickens?
Of course.
Then yeah. Let us take a minute to tell you about Chicken Love.
You get a monthly Chicken Lady tea, treats for your flock, and a keeper care card.
And did you know with every multi-month subscription, you get a free Chicken Love logo t-shirt?
Really?
Yeah.
It's $36 a month with free shipping.
What are you waiting for? Get off the nest and click already. That's chickenlove.com. That's chickenluv.com. Get your subscription today.
The Breed Spotlight is brought to you by Murray McMurray Hatchery, defining quality for generations. For over a century, Murray McMurray Hatchery has remained a trusted family-owned business, working tirelessly to ensure our poultry meet the highest standards.
Whether you are an experienced enthusiast or just embarking on the journey, look to McMurray Hatchery for guaranteed quality, rare and heritage breeds, low minimums, and all the supplies you need to raise your flock. Request a free catalog today. There was a time when we were on a ship. We were rowing, yes. We hit a log and we fell off. But instead, we did a breed spotlight, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That was one of the weirder ones. I'm not sure what was happening there. We were rowing on a ship.
Well, we are actually rowing on a canoe, and we did hit a log in high school.
Yeah, but what's that have to do with this bird?
Well, I said it in a Norwegian way.
That was Oh my God. That was a Norwegian way. Okay. Well.
You didn't get that?
No, I did not.
Okay, so this week's bird is
the Norwegian Jaerhon. Yeah. Now this is a really pretty bird. The Jaerhon is the only surviving chicken breed indigenous to Norway, and they are named for the beautiful Jaerhon region. And a lot of it's coastal, so maybe that ties into your really weird rowing song. The Jaerhon.
I'm still laughing over here. I'm still laughing.
You're cracking yourself up. The Jaerhon are an auto-sexing breed of chicken. They were developed during the early 20th century. Now, they're linked to Norway's old landrace breed, which roughly translated means the Norwegian country hen or the Norwegian land hen.
Right.
And it was this old breed that was essentially the foundation breed for the Jaerhon. And they, like most landrace breeds, had varying appearances. The birds could have crests, beards and muffs, feathered legs and feet, and all different colors.
Or none of those things.
I suppose that's true. I mean, they all had beards and muffs and legs, but yeah.
They have legs, but they might not have beards or muffs.
Now, the country hens were almost extinct in Norway when work began in Jaerhon on the Jaerhon, and that was the year 1916.
Okay.
What happens is whomever started this breeding project, they found a single pair of these old Norwegian birds. And allegedly, all of the Jaerhons come from this initial pair.
Wow. They were busy.
Well, and again, I've been trying for a long time to find more information about this, right? We don't really know much about it. Like we don't know a whole lot of anything. What we do know is that there was a flock of Jaerhons that was bred and maintained at the state-controlled breeding station in Breen until it closed in 1973. Breen is the city. But again, it was supposed to be this single pair of chickens, and they were line breeding from these chickens.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a little strange.
I guess it's not that strange. It's just, there's just a lot of holes in the history, so we don't know exactly what happened.
Exactly.
Now, after 1973, when the breeding station in Breen closed, the Jaerhon was moved to a newly created gene bank and have been maintained there in an unbroken line. Jaerhons were originally imported to the US in 1996. They are not currently APA recognized.
Okay,
No.
so 1996 isn't that long ago, and
Nope.
I mean, there's not going to be a ton of them here, I feel like.
There are not a ton of them here. You can get them, but there are not a ton of them. So in 2002, Sandhill Preservation began breeding the Jaerhon, and they ended up developing a new offshoot variety based on a color variation. This is not something you'd find in Norway. They called it the flame Jaerhon. And while it's not recognized in Norway, as I said, this was interesting. Sandhill Preservation notes that this flame variety is much cold hardier in the U.S. than the original Jaerhons.
That's strange to me.
Right.
I mean, Norway's known for having cold areas.
Right. I mean, we're going to talk about more of that at the end of the spotlight, but that's what they noticed, that the original Jaerhons, they struggled with the cold.
Well, that takes us into it's a light-bodied chicken, and the roosters are coming in weighing up to 5 pounds. That's up to, that's not around 5. So they can be smaller also. And the hens average is about 3.5. So they are a little bird. Think about like leghorns, lake bars, that size chicken. Now they have a moderate size straight comb, yellow legs and feet, and white earlobes. White earlobes.
Yeah.
They have that upright tail like the leghorn and some of the other Mediterraneans. So in more ways than one, they're like the leghorns and the leghorns.
Yeah.
They come in 2 colors. Can you guess?
Dark and light.
You're right. I will give you $500 for being right. in imaginary money. Both feature...
I feel cheated.
It's just like Sophia's 500 for answering the question, who was the first president of the United States, or my dad. Okay, so both feature very pretty, irregular barring in shades of brown, gray, gold, and cream.
They're beautiful birds. They're
really pretty. They're pretty little chickens.
Mm-hmm.
Now, hens are good layers of large white eggs. This is one thing we're learning about some of the smaller breed chickens that have that Mediterranean kind of way about them. They lay some big eggs.
They do.
And you're like, how did that come out of that chicken? But it does. They give you some larger eggs.
Yep.
Now, this is a kicker here. They're going to give you 2 to 250 per year. This is my very good category.
Yeah.
So they're good layers. They need some help. So people need to get this bird, definitely. And they do not go broody generally. So all those things are really like, hey, that's good stuff.
I feel like the Norwegian country hen or the Norwegian land hen, maybe it has some Mediterranean roots.
It seems like it does, even in its the way it looks, the size variety, all that different stuff, the large white eggs. Maybe it does. Maybe those Romans came in again. Those Romans.
No, I don't think it would have been would it have been the Romans?
The Romans brought in some Mediterranean birds, slipped them in there.
Well, because, as we said before, because the Jaerhon was developed in Norway, people assume that they are very cold hardy, but apparently they do not do well in very cold.
Except for those flame ones by Sandhill. Do better.
Right. And and they're not a recognized variety. And that's probably because they're so light-bodied. That would be my guess.
They're little and they don't have a lot of feather fluff.
No.
So you put those things together and you get a chicken that gets cold pretty easily.
Know what else happens?
They fly a lot.
They fly really well.
Yes, because they're little and they don't have weight holding them down to the ground. So
right. And
I mean, they can be flighty in the truest sense of the word.
I saw people calling them flighty, and it was definitely because they had a startle reflex. I mean, that's how small birds survive.
You can't fault a chicken. Flighty comes across as, oh, they're bad, they're flighty, but you can't fault a chicken. It's actually smart.
Right.
That chicken is smart to get away from what's going to be
That is self-preservation. That's right.
Exactly.
You may want to either build them a large aviary style run or make sure that they're supervised during free range. Otherwise, they might end up in the trees.
Otherwise, they're going to end up in these trees, and that's not fun.
No.
That is not a fun thing.
But these birds are beautiful. They're colorful. They're excellent foragers. They're very good additions to permaculture, regenerative or ecological gardens, because they're going to give you lots of fertilizer. They're going to turn over beds for you. They're going to scratch and dig. They're awesome little birds.
Now, reports are coming in that they are friendly and they do well in a mixed flock. So that's a good thing to remember for those homestead birds. I mean, you want the birds to get along. That's for sure.
Right. And people who keep them agree that they are friendly and happy little birds and they like to hang out with their people, but they generally don't want to be held and cuddled. Reminds me a whole lot of the Swedish flowers, actually.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of different birds are like that. And we always say, sometimes you'll get a different bird that loves it. And sometimes if you put more time in on the front end, it'll be easier to handle them on the back end.
Yes.
That's what she said. But sorry. Sometimes if you handle them on the front end and the back end, it's good. So, you'll be able to handle them a lot. So where can everybody go? And this one's easy.
Your Sandhill Preservation. That's the only place I found that, yeah. There might be some more small farms out there, but literally Sandhill Preservation was the main place that I found them.
I mean, it makes it an easy thing. Here's the thing about Sandhill Preservation. We've said it before, straight run. So you have to be good with getting boys and what you're going to do.
Yeah.
So if you have the Norwegian Jaerhon, send us a picture. We want to see it on our social media. Share a story, hit the mention button, put our name in. It'll share to our messages and we can reshare.
Are you ready to dive into the fascinating world of backyard ducks? Look no further than Metzer Farms, your premier destination for top quality waterfowl. Whether you're a seasoned breeder or just starting out, Metzer Farms has everything you need to elevate your flock to the next level. And if you're passionate about call ducks, you're in for a treat.
Metzer Farms hatches a stunning variety of call ducks, meticulously bred for their miniature size, beauty, and calm temperament. From snowy whites to vibrant colors, each duck is a masterpiece waiting to grace your backyard. Visit metzerfarms.com today to browse their extensive selection and start your journey into the wonderful world of waterfowl. Metzer Farms, where passion meets perfection.
If you're looking for a chicken coop that's produced in a planet-friendly, sustainable way, try Nestera.
Each coop is made from highly durable, 100% recycled plastic that keeps the equivalent of up to 2,000 shampoo bottles out of a landfill.
Their clean, modern design will fit into any garden or run area and comes with an industry-beating 25-year warranty and a range of handy accessories.
Simple to put together, so quick and easy to clean, and most importantly, red mite resistant. Your chickens will love it.
Quick shipping from Nestera.us.
For a 5% discount, use the affiliate link in our show notes, on our website, and on Instagram. Link in bio. Check them out today. Roosty's proudly sponsors Coffee with the Chicken Ladies. They're back with an innovative new product. You're going to want to check this out.
It's an extra large set, a 14-pound feeder and 3-gallon water with steep anti-roost lids. They're made of super durable material. You can either stand them on legs or hang them on brackets on your coop or fence. They're easy to remove and clean too. Plus, they look awesome.
We personally use Roosties and we're huge fans. So if you're raising chicks or keeping chickens, check out the Roosty store on Amazon or follow the link in our show notes. Okay, so are we ready to move on to main topic? Yeah.
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 Okay, this week, we are super happy to have Dr. Yuko Sato back on the show with us. Dr. Yuko is Associate Professor, Poultry Extension Veterinarian, and Diagnostic Pathologist at the Iowa State University Vet Diagnostic Lab. Dr. Yuko, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Welcome back. It's so nice to have you. We're so happy to be able to talk to you today because there's lots of confusion out there on what's going on. And we were like, who do we bring in? And there was no thinking about it. We know Dr. Yuko has to come back on the show because you have a fun way of bringing science into this and still being a really fun conversation and educational at the same time. So we'll start with, can you give us the science behind what avian flu actually is?
So I'll start with the very basic property of a virus, right? So we all know flu or influenza in general, right? In people, it's a respiratory virus, right? And if I go into the super science of things, there's influenza A, B, and C. People can get different types of influenza, right? So most people get like influenza A or influenza B when you go to the doctor's office. For avian influenza, that's only influenza A.
Okay.
And that's what's happening in the chicken side, and that's also what's happening on the cattle side. So that's all influenza A.
Okay.
So we'll go deeper down into the properties of the virus. So influenza is an RNA virus. So there's a DNA virus and an RNA virus. And when I teach students, I make it very simple. I talk about, DNA versus RNA. DNA is a very stable virus. It's a hardy virus. So in the environment, it's also hardy, but it's also very stable, meaning it doesn't change a lot. So influenza is an RNA virus, which means it's a little bit more fragile in the environment, but it's also prone to change. So think about COVID-19. Coronavirus is also another RNA virus. It's not hard to get rid of it in the environment, but it keeps on changing. That's why you had the Delta, the Omicron, all these different strains of COVID that's going around. And then I go into the properties of influenza being an enveloped virus. So there's viruses that have an envelope and viruses that don't have an envelope. And it seems counterintuitive, but what it actually is, so influenza is an enveloped RNA virus. So this envelope is what keeps this virus surviving.
Okay.
So once you get rid of the envelope, the virus is actually dead or inactivated. So if you think about the properties of a virus, it's a unstable RNA virus that doesn't survive very well in the environment. And if you get rid of the envelope, this virus dies. So it's actually a pretty fragile virus as far as a physical property of the virus. Mm-hmm. But the kicker is it's a virus that keeps on changing because it's an RNA virus that's prone to mutations.
What's an example of a DNA virus?
Great question. So a DNA virus is something like a pox virus. So if you think about chicken pox, right, it's a pretty big virus. And it's pretty stable in the environment, but you don't think about people having different strains of chickenpox, right? So people have pox. At the end of the day, you get vaccinated, no problem. So that's a pretty stable DNA virus.
So for the RNA viruses, are they harder to vaccinate against because they're mutating and changing?
Yes. Yeah. Because you have to keep track of what is going on. And it depends on what part of the virus mutates, right? Okay. And if it's something that's related to immunity, then if that part shifts, then the virus may not be, whatever challenge is going on, the vaccine might not be protective against it.
Wow.
And then the envelope that is where you're talking about, what is that made of?
It's a lipid, so it's a fat layer. So it kind of keeps that virus kind of intact. So it's protective of the virus, but again, it makes the virus a little bit more prone to desiccation. So that's why influenza viruses in general, they survive better in the winter and cold months, because viruses in general, they kind of need a cold chain. But you also need that humidity. Once it starts to get in the summer, that's why you see a lot less cases of influenza, because it's dry in the environment with the sun.
Interesting. Okay.
Awesome.
Okay.
That's awesome to hear you explain it.
Essentially, the fact that migrating waterfowl are carrying this and they're in cold regions probably is really bad.
Yes. Yep.
Wow. That's interesting. Okay.
So maybe what I can go through is talk about a little bit about the history about this virus too.
Yeah.
Oh, we would love it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's perfect.
So it'll be a little bit complicated, but I'll write it down on a piece of paper so it's a little bit easier to see. Maybe it'll be backwards, but
no one else can see this but us. So we're lucky here.
Yeah. So there's different types of viruses that are out there. So this particular virus is an H5N1 virus. So what we saw in 2015 was actually a combination of an H5N8 and an H5N2. So the N2 virus is what kind of circulated predominantly in 2015, and then it suddenly mysteriously went away in wild bird populations and in domestic poultry. So it just kind of went away. And then we've had few introductions here and there throughout, like between 26 and 22, but there wasn't like a predominating virus around. But all this virus originated back in the early 90s. It's called a goose Guangdong virus that was isolated from the Guangdong region in China, from a goose out there. And that's how this virus kind of evolved. What's interesting about this virus, typically, as you guys mentioned, the waterfowl carry this virus, right? And then it goes into or spills over into domestic poultry. And that's usually it, right? So the poultry gets sick and they die, the end, right?
Right.
The part that's unique about this particular virus is the wild birds carry it. They may or may not die from it, but if they don't die and they spread it to domestic poultry, right, they get sick, but they actually have spilled back into wild birds again. So they're kind of doing this back and forth. So that's what makes this virus a little bit unique than the other viruses that have been going on.
Okay.
So this virus, again, has been around globally since the 90s, and it's kind of evolved over time. Go ahead.
Guangdong goose, I'm assuming that was a wild goose.
It was a wild goose. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. In China.
And the other thing is, if raptors eat the birds after they carry it, then they can also pass it, correct? So that is also in the food chain. It's getting passed along that way too.
So the raptors, typically, they're fairly susceptible to the virus. So if they eat, let's say, for example, a duck or a goose that's positive with the virus, they typically die, and that's probably it.
Okay. So they're
Yeah.
kind of end chain just because nothing else eats them.
Yeah, they're kind of a dead end. They die so quickly. So
Okay.
that's why they're typically a dead end host. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the virologists out there, in order to kind of classify the virus, they'll kind of put them in branches, kind of like thinking about the epidemiology of the virus. So this current strain of the virus is what's called a 2344B virus.
Okay.
So it's like all these like different designations. It's kind of like an area code.
Okay.
Right? So back in 2015, what we had was a 2344C as in cat.
Okay.
Don't ask me why the B comes after C, but that's how it happens in nature. It's just how the science goes. So this is the one that's wreaking havoc right now. So some people call it the 2344B Goose Guangdong H5N1 virus. That's what's circulating around.
That's a long name.
That's a long name. That's why I wrote it down. Okay. And then what we're seeing, so then there's like two, I guess, main types. So then from there, people go talk about the genotypes of viruses. So you've probably heard of the dairy cattle virus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the dairy cattle virus. So what scientists do, so obviously you can characterize a virus by high path and low path, right? But it's highly pathogenic to chickens, right? Not to cattle, not to people, not to cats, not to anything else, just chickens, right? So there's highly pathogenic avian influenza. You have the H type, right? So the H5 type and the N type that kind of tells you what kind of virus it is based on the HA protein and the NA protein. That's the surface glycoproteins of the virus.
Okay.
And then you have this long, cumbersome clade of the virus, right?
Virus zip code.
Yeah, virus zip code, right? Then from there, this isn't enough information because you want to know how the virus travels from geographic areas over time or different populations of animals or people. So what people do from there is they look at the genotype of the virus. That's basically taking the whole virus segment and looking at properties of it to see where it falls under as far as differences between each other. So that's how they distinguish different genotypes.
Okay.
And that kind of it's a temporospatial analysis. So it's time and it's geographic area. That kind of gives you that genotype of the virus.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay.
So with me so far, I know it's really technical.
No,
but-
totally with you. Because,
yeah.
I mean, there are the rumors out there that this is not real. So we want to explain to people that this is a virus, just like you would think of the flu. It's a virus that's out there that is real. It is real, and there's the science that backs it.
Yes. So now the dairy strain of the virus is what's called the B313. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. It has nothing to do with the B as bovine. It has nothing to do with it. It's just a genogroup B, genotype B313. So that's the type of the virus that's out there. So that's the one that spread from, you probably read in the news, from the dairy herd in Texas, and it kind of went all throughout the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And until probably about last month, we thought that was the only spillover into cattle, right? Cats died. Obviously, there were poultry that were dying, and then the cattle were getting sick, right? So that's the genotype of the virus. In the same time, there's a different genotype of the virus called D11. Okay, that's a wild bird strain of the virus. Okay. Until last month, that was the only strain that was found in cattle. They're all consistent. The virus didn't really change, meaning the virus is spreading from herd to herd. It's not coming from different introductions of wild birds, which is great news, right?
Right.
All you have to do is protect the cattle herd with good biosecurity, right? Keep in mind, this is highly pathogenic avian influenza, right? It's still an avian virus. It's not a cattle virus, right?
Okay.
It just happened to be in a different host, which is cattle, right? It's not highly pathogenic to cattle, right? That's why cattle aren't dying from this. They can, just like us, right? Most people don't die from flu.
Right.
I would say a good majority. This strain of virus is particularly pathogenic. So I think in different countries, you can have maybe up to 50% mortality, depending on how bad it is.
Okay.
But usually a lot of people have underlining issues, like underlining health issues.
Okay.
So, but then you have this D11, which is a wild bird strain, right? All of this is still highly pathogenic avian influenza, which means it's pathogenic to birds, really causes high mortality, makes birds really sick, right? Again, this is still influenza, still avian viruses, right? But now we had two different new introductions into cattle with this strain. Okay, so while this is going on in dairy herds, because that's kind of how it was maintained right now, because it's not spreading from a dairy herd to wild birds. It's just going from cattle to cattle. That's how it's going. Sometimes it spills over to domestic poultry. That's why you see cases of influenza actually really high last summer, because they were getting poultry flocks that are getting infected from dairy herds.
Okay.
So we had B313 positive poultry flocks. Meanwhile, the rest of the country has this strain of the virus carried by wild birds, right? Still highly pathogenic to poultry, right? So poultry are dying from this at the same time with this, right? So that's been going on.
Oh,
concurrent.
wow. So
Yep.
it's like
Poor
a crossover.
poultry.
For
Yeah.
poultry, yes. Yep.
It's like
So
a
now we had
crossover of the
two new detections of D11 actually in cattle. So now we have two evidences that these two viruses have the ability to actually cross into cattle, not just for poultry. Again, not new news that these genotypes of the virus go into poultry or in wild birds. Nothing new, right? But this is now we have three different independent introductions into cattle. So that's what's going on with the virus.
So
world.
we now know that when wild birds fly over, they are then passing it to others who don't have the other strain. So we're not closed off at this point. It's going to continue to go.
Right. Yeah. So the one that's circulating around predominantly is this one.
Right.
Okay.
Wild birds.
The
Right.
D1.
There are other strains out there, and there are other non-high path strains or not even H5 viruses that wild birds can carry.
Okay.
We find that routinely too. And we've done
those-
some research too.
Are those viruses that could make, say, your flocks slightly not feel well for a few days and then they bounce back because it's not one that's like a high mortality rate?
Sure. Yep. So we talked about high path, but there's also low path. So the ones that are of concern to the poultry industry is an H5 and an H7. Okay. So there's actually 16 different H types of the virus.
Wow.
Just the ones of concern to poultry are 5 and 7. So there's two
Okay.
types that we worry about. The only reason we worry about 5 and 7 is because even if it's a low path, 5 or 7, that virus can actually mutate to become high path. That's why we're worried about this.
Okay.
So you've probably heard of swine flu, right?
Yes.
That's not a 5, that's not a 7, that's an H1N1, right? So that's one of the H types of the virus. That is a low path virus to us in the
Okay.
poultry industry. Obviously, it got people sick, right?
Yes.
Obviously, pigs got sick, right? But
Right.
not enough to cause high mortality like we do in the poultry industry. Because if we have 5 and 7 high path influenza, your mortality rate is about 100%.
Wow. Well, that's a question there because
Crazy.
we've heard people discussing this, and tell us if this makes sense, if this or why it doesn't. We've heard people saying, look, if let's say there's a commercial breeding operation and bird flu comes through and it kills most of the birds, but not all of them, would the survivors be immune and could you breed them and expect immunity in other generations, or is that completely unrealistic?
That's a great question. The short answer is yes, you'll probably find some birds that survive the virus. What we don't know is, did they survive because they never got infected, or did they go through it and survive? We don't know the answer, right?
Okay.
And the reason why we don't know the answer is because we assume almost 100% fatality rate with this virus. So the longer we keep the birds, we're actually watching them die. We're actually bringing on animal welfare issues.
Right.
That's why we want to put down the birds as quickly as possible for two reasons. One is animal welfare, and the second one is basically for biocontainment.
Right.
So a dead bird is not going to produce more virus, but a live bird that's continuing to be sick, those are the birds that are going to continue to produce more and more virus and spread it around.
So they're
So what we
shedding.
want to do is make sure we put down, so I don't like to use the word euthanize because it's not a good death. This is a emergency depopulation.
Yeah.
We depopulate or we kill the birds as soon as possible so they don't produce any more virus. That's why we don't know the answer to this question.
Okay.
Such a sad situation out there. I wanted to ask a question and go into biosecurity for a backyard flock and what can people do to protect their birds? They have a flock of 5 to 50 birds and they want to protect some hardcore stuff that they can do to protect their flock with biosecurity against avian flu.
So it's all about common sense. So if you basically think about how people get flu, right? It's from interacting with other people, right? The complicated part is that the chickens aren't going to interact with other chickens on their own, right? But they might be interacting with other chickens because people make them interact with other chickens. So that's where it becomes important. Let's say if you have a flock of chickens that goes to shows, right? That's a risky event that might have an opportunity to be exposed to other birds, right? Because you don't know if they're sick or not, right? And again, if you think about fair requirements, most fairs do not require birds to be tested for influenza, right? They're tested for pullorum typhoid, which is a breeding stock disease, right? But unless the state fair or the county fair superintendent asks them to test for influenza, there's no requirements to test for influenza. Okay. So again, they may be exposed, they may not, right? The other thing is if you have birds that are housed outside, right? What's to say, oh, no, you can't have wild birds come and hang out with you. We can't really prevent that from happening, right?
Right.
So, yeah, especially if they have a flock that just goes outside, it's hard to prevent that from happening. The third part is if you have people that are coming to visit your flock. So if you have visitors, who knows where they've been, right? Maybe that person who might be coming to visit you is an avid hunter, right? And they go out and they shot a bunch of ducks. And if one of them has a bunch of flu and they have their dirty hunting clothes with them, especially with their shoes, they might be exposing the environment that your birds are in with that equipment or dirty gear. So those are kind of common sense things. So if you go somewhere, if there's birds there, they may or may not be carrying disease. Just don't bring it back to your flock. If you have people coming in, make sure they're aware that you have birds that are at risk if they are exposed to the virus. So just be cognizant of something like that. And then number 3, if you have birds that are roaming outside, right now there's so many wild birds that carry the virus. So I call it the floor is lava.
Okay.
Right? So even if you go outside, there may be a bunch of geese flying above, right? Because at one point, probably earlier at the end of last year, we had basically birds falling from the sky, right? Because they're getting virus exposed and they're dying, right? So who knows if those birds were carrying the virus and they poop on your property and they go out there and they just pick on the weeds or whatever, and they could have picked up the virus from there. So again, just knowing that if we're in peak migratory bird season, especially with the prevalence of virus carried with wild birds, you're in a risky period. So whatever you do, it's best to keep your birds inside when it's high risk season.
Well, we were saying too, like in the winter, the grass is dead. There's not a lot of bugs out there for them to eat. So it doesn't really make sense to let them go forage out there right now when it's in the dead of winter. Right. Keep them safe inside their own flock.
What alarms me is I recently got geese, and so I'm really getting into waterfowl. What alarms me are all my fellow waterfowl keepers who are like, my birds go out on a pond every day. Yep. I would think that's really unsafe right now.
It is a risk area, yes. Yes, it's hard to control the other wild geese or wild ducks from coming in and hanging out, right?
Right.
It's really hard to say this too, but it's almost like, and I'll be the bad guy for saying it, but to put a stop to maybe showing birds for one season, 1 year, or the fair and the birds, to kind of just put containment on this and stop it in its tracks a little bit so that we're protecting the birds from themselves at this point.
Yep. And that's why we did back in 2015. I know a lot of people were really upset and really disappointed we didn't show chickens for the first time at the Iowa State Fair. But that's the reason why. It's because the virus is wreaking havoc, and we wanted to decrease the risk of the virus moving into our exhibition flocks.
I mean, it makes more sense. You want to protect your birds. Maybe just take that year off. It feels like 2 years ago, we had a big jump in the virus. And last year, there was you didn't really hear as much about it. And then it's back with a vengeance this year. Is that sometimes how viruses can work when they mutate into different types of viruses? Yeah, different strains. Sorry, couldn't think of the word.
So it's hard to say because it can pick up strains. So the common misconception is that the virus needs to mutate so how the virus mutates is you have to have 2 viruses in the same location, essentially in the same animal, actually in the same cell, right? And then that's when they swap genes.
Oh,
right? It doesn't have to be 2 high path viruses. It could be a high path and a low path. It doesn't even have to be a 5 or a 7.
It has to be love at first sight, right? They're like, oh my God.
Swap genes. Yep. And they swap genes. So it could be a benign low path North American strain that's combining with a high path. And whatever it is can trigger it to where it's some part of the gene that makes it either more pathogenic to birds, more pathogenic to other animals, more likely to infect other animals, or more likely to be zoonotic. So there's all these different properties, and it's all by happenstance where the genes are swapped. So we can't really predict what's going to happen until it happens.
when the poultry are picking it up from the cows, is it spread the same way as in the poultry, like saliva and body fluids and things like that?
That's a great question. We don't really know.
Okay.
What we do know is the virus is shed in high quantities in the milk, right? That's why people were worried about the whole milk issue.
Okay.
And we have done, and there are some concurrent studies going on about, we're trying to understand where the virus came in to start with into cattle and how it's spreading from cattle to cattle. I think it's still a little bit unclear right now. We're just trying to understand where in the body of the cattle they go. So some researchers here at Iowa State have actually done some research looking at receptors, because the virus has to bind to the cell of the receptor of the host in order to basically register as a virus and replicate, right? So that basically says if they don't have a receptor, the virus can't bind to that site, meaning it can't reproduce and cause issues. So what we did find is that cattle have receptors for this avian virus all over the place, and it's pretty abundant in the mammary glands where the milks are produced.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but we find it in other animals too. So this receptor is present in people, present in other animals. And again, there's two different types of receptors, and it's based on, I'll go into a little less nitty-gritty, but it's a sialic acid is basically what the property of the bases or of the receptors are. And they have the chicken one and they have a mammal one, but it's basically present in, so both of those are present in different animals too. Okay. So that's how the researchers are looking into it.
Interesting. Wow.
You do such an amazing job explaining this. There's no doubt that you are such an awesome teacher, professor to all the vet students that are out there. I'm learning so much today that I did not know before. Yeah. And I'm so glad that you're a friend of our show and agreed to come back on and talk about this, because it's so important. It's flooding our news right now. Sure. You see about 4 to 5 stories on the news about egg prices, avian flu, all the chickens dying. We wanted people to understand it, because we feel like if you understand it, you're more equipped to deal with it versus just being afraid of it and you don't know.
Yep. Makes sense.
So we recently saw on the news that some vaccines have been approved for use in poultry for avian flu, but that doesn't necessarily mean what we think it does. Can you explain the vaccine situation?
Sure. So maybe I'll talk about the vaccines that are available. So this flu, this 2344B virus, is not just present in the United States, it's actually been present globally. And again, it was originally found in China. It's all over Asia. It's all over Europe. It's all over Africa. It's been around. So depending on the country, their goal might be, okay, this is going out of hand. We need to make sure our goal is to preserve our protein. So some countries have elected to vaccinate. So there are many countries globally that currently vaccinate against influenza. Now, most of those vaccines are killed vaccines. Those are the similar ones we get for our seasonal flu vaccine. So common misconception, you go to get your flu shot and you feel sick. You're not sick with the flu. You're actually sick because of the properties that the virus needs in order to stimulate immunity, right? So that's how you feel sick with a killed vaccine, is because there's stuff in it to basically aggravate your immune system, say, hey, I'm here. I want your body to respond to this.
Okay.
So it's a killed vaccine. That virus is not going to mutate or do anything because it's a dead virus. All it's doing is stimulating antibodies. So basically, antibodies that fight against the virus. It won't cause disease. It's just there as a immunity process.
Okay.
Right? So that's the majority of the vaccines that are out there. There is one type of vaccine that's out there, which is a recombinant vaccine, which is basically you take a big virus like a pox virus, right? And you insert parts of the influenza virus into that big virus. So it's a recombinant gene vaccine where you take the immunologic properties of influenza, put that in a big virus, and you vector it in. So it's basically like a tag-along vaccine. So you get immunity for 2 things out of it at the same time. It's like a 2-for-1. But because you're taking a portion of the virus in there, that virus is not going to cause disease, right? Because the flu is just a chunk of the gene. It's not the entire influenza virus.
Right.
It's just so like, think of it as like you have a train, right? And you just have one portion of your train with that one insertion in there. That's it, right?
Okay.
But that's the one that causes the immunity to happen, right? So it's a vectored vaccine. So that's what was used in France. back in 22. And the reason why is because it hit their duck industry so hard that it devastated 85% of their foie gras industry. And their industry was going to die. So what they did was, we want to make sure this industry survives. So what they decided to do was, we are only going to vaccinate ducks. No chickens, no turkeys, no other poultry, just ducks. So they decided to start vaccinating in 2022 to reduce the death loss and save their protein for the ducks. Right? And again, we're talking about a vaccine. It's not a silver bullet. It's not a magic wand. Just like a COVID vaccine, it's not going to prevent the birds from getting infected, right? But what it can do is it can reduce the clinical signs, just like a COVID vaccine. If you don't have a vaccine, you may be on a ventilator on your deathbed in a hospital, but then you're just a little bit sick, right? That's the hope it does. And if you're a little less sick, the idea is you're shedding a lot less virus.
So do we have any numbers back from France yet from 2022? Did it help?
It did help, but here's the part that gets complicated. Did it help because the vaccine worked, or did it help because there was a lot less virus circulating around?
Exactly.
Right? It's hard to say, right? Because one year is different from the other.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, so it's kind of apples to oranges. Did it work for them? Absolutely. And they're tracking it. But what they want to make sure they do is, because you vaccinate, just like COVID, right? It's a lot harder to tell these days whether somebody has COVID or something else, right? And the reason why, because when we first started having COVID, nobody was vaccinated, right? So if you tested positive for COVID, that means you have COVID, right? It's a clear black and white answer. Same thing with flu right now with domestic poultry. If you test positive for flu, it means you have flu, right? Black and white. Once you start vaccinating, especially with a live vaccine, you're not going to be able to tell whether you actually have flu or you're positive for flu because you were vaccinated.
I guess at that point you have to pull in if they're symptomatic or what's going on otherwise. It's really, it's hard to say. Wow.
Right. And that other part that gets complicated right now, the poultry industry is almost like a cannery in a coal mine.
Yeah.
Because as soon as a virus hits a flock, again, the mortality rate's close to 100%, right? It hits there, it hits it fast. And then the birds tell you, like, mortality goes from 5 or 10 a day to like 3,000, right? So it's going to be pretty dramatic. The birds are going to tell you the virus is here.
Yeah.
If you vaccinate, again, you're going to decrease your clinical signs and slow down your mortality, slow down your spread a little bit, right? So it could be like, oh, it went from 5 to maybe 50 to maybe 100, right? And it's going to be a little bit harder to say whether we have the virus or not. And what it does is it delays detection. And that's what we get worried about. Because let's say if you were really sick and you were coughing and sneezing, you know you're not going to go outside and you're not going to play with other people or go to the gym or, go grocery shopping.
Even though these days some people do it and I'm like, why? No.
But like if somebody says like, oh, I have this party coming up and you're starting to cough, sneeze, whatever, and you feel like crap, you're not going to go to that party,
Don't
right?
go to the party.
Let's hope not.
Yeah. But if you're vaccinated and you're like, oh, you know what? I have a little cough. My throat's a little sore. I think I'm okay. And you go, right? That's the fear we have is if you have vaccinated birds, it's actually going to calm down your clinical signs to a point where you might be accidentally spreading virus without you knowing.
Right.
Okay.
That's the part that we worried about. It's going to delay detection. And when it happens, right, irrespective of whether the birds are vaccinated or not, same thing with France, same thing with any other country, if they're vaccinated, but they test positive, meaning if they're infected, they're still putting down the birds, right? Because these are infected birds that can spread the virus to other facilities.
Okay.
So they're putting down those birds, right? But if it's harder to say if they're infected or not, it's going to delay them from finding that original detection.
So right now, just biosecurity. Be so safe and lock down your flock, basically.
Right.
So the only thing we can do is just be safe.
So we know how the vaccines work, but they're actually not cleared for use in the US right now anyway.
Yes. Yep. That hasn't changed.
Okay.
Wow.
And the reason why is the intent of the vaccine. So in France, it's really clear. Their goal was to save an industry. So save protein. That's what they wanted to do, right? In our industry in the United States, our goal is to eradicate the virus, stamp out the virus. We don't want to live with this forever. And what we do with the vaccine, so think about pre-COVID era, right? That was something we never thought about. It caused a pandemic, whatever. Now people get vaccinated. And some people choose to get vaccinated. Some people don't choose to get vaccinated. That's fine. But now it's kind of part of our normal everyday life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So way back when we first started seeing COVID, if we wanted to say, I don't want to live with COVID ever again, they could have said, okay, we're going to quarantine these people until they stop shedding the virus. And that could have been it, right?
Okay.
But we didn't do that. That's why the virus is just here to stay forever, right?
Okay.
And we have no hope of saying like, oh, we can eradicate COVID forever, right?
It's there.
Yeah, it's there and it's not going to go away.
Okay.
So it's the same reason. So if you live with the fact that you're going to vaccinate the birds, you're going to live with the fact that you may not eradicate the virus ever again, right?
Okay.
Now, this may change as in the fact that if the virus mutates and there's no other, this virus is not the predominant strain, that may go away. We don't know that, right? Because it's nature.
Okay.
Right. But at this point, it seems like this virus is here to stay, at least in the wild bird population.
Yeah.
So again, for now, it seems daunting, but at the same time, if our goal is to eradicate the virus, then we're going in the wrong direction by using vaccines because we're actually prolonging that suffering.
Okay. Wow. That's fascinating. So really, I mean, like Chrissy said, biosecurity, that's your front line is biosecurity.
Yeah. And again, I know the USDA came up with like a 5-pronged bird flu strategy, and they talked about all these biosecurity measures, et cetera. And the reason why they're still focusing on biosecurity is because short term, they're still using biosecurity as their main form of defense. Nothing is changing as far as the protocol goes. The long-term strategy, if this goes on forever, right, then we have to maybe start thinking about other strategies. And that's why they're putting vaccine as a tool in the toolbox. Not saying we're going to use them, but we can think about using them, because what people say is like, let's use a vaccine. But what we don't know is how, when, who's going to get it, how are we going to deliver it, how long are we going to do this, and how do we get out of it if we are, right?
So as part of that 5-pronged approach, I was reading that they were talking about repealing an act in California, and I believe it was the act that makes tiny battery cages illegal so that hens have to have more space.
I mean, you're talking about Proposition 12?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
So I was struggling to understand that. Like, if it's in the building, does it matter if the hens are in a battery cage or not?
Doesn't matter. Yeah, that's a welfare standard that people use. But what I'm concerned about, part of welfare is health.
Right.
So as you're exposed to other variables that you can't control outside, then it's really hard to control bird health, because now you have all these outside variables that can influence it, including
there are a lot of them.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually, if you even think about free range or organic flock, so one of the requirements is to go outside when the weather is nice, right? But you can ask as a producer during these situations of high path to get a waiver from your state veterinarian to say, can I keep birds inside? Because we're at high risk right now. All these birds are migrating and I don't want my birds to be exposed.
I mean, that part does make sense.
It makes perfect sense. I was just very confused why Proposition 12 was mixed in there, because I couldn't understand if the birds are in a building already. Doesn't matter if they're caged, free, whatever, if the virus is already in the building.
Right. Yep. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Just to clarify, I really struggled with that one.
So we just want to thank you again for coming on and giving us this information. We definitely want to have you back as things change. We'd love to have you as our show's expert on avian flu, because you are so intelligent and just amazing, and we love you. And you just say things so that we can understand them in such a logical way, and I think it's really good. So I just want to thank you again for coming on.
Absolutely. I learned so much in the last half an hour. It's kind of incredible. This is fantastic. Thank you. Yeah.
It's amazing. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Until next time, we'll talk to you later.
Sounds good. Have a good one. Have a great weekend.
Bye. You too. Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
We just want to thank Dr. Yuko one more time for spending some time with us, really getting into the nitty-gritty of avian flu. I think as poultry keepers, it's really beneficial for all of us to understand the science behind this virus.
Yeah. If you don't understand it, that's what becomes the worst, is the unknown. So understanding and educating yourself on the reality of it and what it is keeps you in a good place and understanding.
Most fear comes from ignorance. And if you can understand the science behind it, you do a lot better.
Exactly.
Our friends at Good Eggs solve the age-old question of how should I wash my eggs?
They're chicken people just like us who created the original silicone egg scrubber.
Both Chrissy and I use their brush and natural enzyme wash every time.
It's a total game changer.
It makes cleaning eggs so much faster and easier, plus they have a lifetime guarantee.
Good Egg is a small family business right here in the U.S., and they donate 10% of all profit directly to folks affected by cancer.
Go check them out at goodeggstuff.co.
That's goodeggstuff.co. Tell them Chrisie&Holly sent you. So are we ready to move on to
Cracking the eggs.
cracking those eggs? Now, March, we decided to do Irish recipes because they're fun. And you're Irish, so...
Yeah, my last name gives that away.
Really?
Right? Yeah.
I didn't notice. So,
Not my married last name because that's Polish, but yeah.
So this week's recipe is...
We're doing Irish soda bread. Now, Irish soda bread's an interesting thing. This usually is not an everyday bread that you would find in Ireland. That's usually like a brown bread loaf. This is more like a special occasion, sort of a tea bread. You know, has raisins in it. It can be a little sweeter. It's amazing with butter and jam on it.
Sounds good.
My mom had a recipe she got from a friend in Ireland that she used for years. She can't find it. This is my closest approximation to it. And I know some things are different, but this one is really good.
Okay, so let's go through the ingredients that you're going to need for the Irish soda bread. That's 5 cups of all-purpose flour or gluten-free 1-to-1 flour, 1/3 cup sugar, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/2 cup of unsalted butter or dairy-free butter, and it needs to be cut in cubes, 2.5 cups of brown and golden raisins or currants, or a mixture. If you're feeling kind of like, hey, I want to do a little mix
it up.
3 tablespoons of caraway seeds, 2.5 cups of buttermilk, and last but not least, 1 large egg.
That's right. You're going to preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. You'll like this. You want to either line a baking sheet with lightly greased parchment paper, or, this is easier for most people, generously butter or grease an oven-proof 10 to 12-inch diameter cast iron skillet.
Oh, yeah.
And my mom always made it in a skillet.
I like a good reason to pull out my cast iron skillet.
Yeah. I make it in a round on a baking sheet, but the skillet makes it really easy. So in a large mixing bowl, you're going to whisk together the flour, sugar, baking powder, baking soda, and salt. You're going to add the butter, and you're going to use a pastry blender, or some people use their fingertips, and you're going to cut that butter in until it forms coarse crumbles.
Now, you could also just put that in a food processor and pulse it a few times, too.
That's not traditional Irish country kitchen, though. Get your arm in there. Do some work. Cut that butter in.
I might be using that food processor, man.
You newfangled Italians over there. So then you're going to stir in your raisins and your currants and whatever you're using, and caraway seeds. Now, either in a smaller bowl, or if you have a really nice big measuring cup or batter pitcher, you're going to put the buttermilk in there, add the egg, and whisk them together. Once they're combined, pour that into the dough and use a heavy wooden spoon or a spatula to just stir it until it's all pretty well incorporated. The dough is going to be really sticky. The buttermilk makes it super sticky.
Right.
So at that point, you're either going to dump it into your skillet, or you're going to scrape it out onto the parchment paper. You're going to use wet fingers to shape the dough into a round loaf. Spread it out evenly. You want it kind of domed.
Okay.
You're going to use a small sharp knife to cut an X in the top of the soda bread, and you're going to pop that in the oven. Now, the cooking time calls for about an hour. If your oven runs hot like mine does, I would check this at 45 or 50 minutes.
And mine runs like everything takes longer.
So you probably could check it at about an hour.
Right.
Yeah. So just be cognizant of that, and just don't think of this as a hard and fast rule. So start checking it. You want to cool it in the skillet for at least 10 minutes, and then you're going to turn it out and let it cool completely. Obviously, if you did it on the baking sheet, you're just going to put it on a rack to cool. And then you can serve it however you like it. Like I said, my family likes it with butter and jam. It's delicious.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely good. Take it and talk some chickens with your bestie, hang out, and have fun. It's a great recipe to take somewhere with you, a hostess gift, and, just enjoy.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to retail therapy. Retail therapy. Yeah. This week's retail therapy, we are talking vintage chicken aprons or poultry aprons. So if you like geese or ducks or whatever, or turkeys. Yeah, there are aprons out there that are really cool and just fun.
We were talking about this because we were talking about Easter coming up, and it is kind of fun. If you are entertaining on Easter, pop out your fancy apron, because there are some really pretty aprons out there right now.
There are some really pretty ones. There's some really reproduction vintage right now that you can even just go onto Amazon if you don't want to search for an actual vintage.
Right.
That have that look to them. And the other thing is, it's kind of fun to put them on if you're dressed up and you want to look a little bit retro.
It does protect your clothing. I mean, they do serve a practical purpose.
The practical purpose is to protect you from when you're baking, all that flour getting all over you.
Oh, I have to say, everywhere.
Thanksgiving and Christmas, I always wear an apron. Always. I have it on mostly the whole day, because if not, I'll get everything on me. I'm that cook that gets everything, even if I'm trying not to. Me too.
Me too. I just splash things. I'm an enthusiastic baker. That's all.
So the first place you can go is Etsy, of course. You're going to find handmade aprons there, and also vintage. eBay's another place.
Some people have been doing a big thing with the vintage aprons, but there a lot of what you can find vintage wise, especially mid-century, is a half apron.
Oh yeah, I like half aprons too.
The half aprons are very pretty. They're really cute. I favor the full apron because, like I said, I'm a kind of a messy cook. So, but the half aprons, you can find them with retro chicken prints, and they're ruffly and all that good stuff.
Oh yeah, definitely. Also, there's a place near us, in Habitat Grace, Maryland, called Joe Retro. We've actually a long time ago talked about her store.
Right.
But she has all the retro Pyrex, everything. She has a whole rack full of vintage aprons usually every time you go in. It's really fun. Okay,
I just found an apron on Amazon, and it's different goose breeds, and the label at the top says honkers.
That's
I kind of like that one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I saw, I was surprised, but Amazon had some really cute ones. Here's the other thing you can find. Patterns to make your own.
Yeah, if you're into sewing, you can definitely do that, especially if you have some really nice vintage fabric.
Yeah, then you can just find your own fabric and have the pattern. You can buy a pattern on Etsy, the 1950 Mrs. Apron, and it has a chicken on it, no lie.
Fun.
Wait, you can't really see it. Here,
okay.
Can you see that now?
Yeah, I can see it. It's really cute.
$21 for the pattern. And then you can, use whatever fabric with chickens on it that you want, goose, ducks, whatever's your fancy, turkeys, and have it for when you're having family over for the holidays, for Easter, for that St. Patty's Day dinner that the Irish want to do. Put an apron on.
I found a really cute one. It's kind of Christmassy. Let me see if I can show this to you. It's a red yeah, it's very Christmassy. Southwest Airline is interrupting me to ask if we want to get away. Yes, Southwest, we do want to get away. So that's the top of it. It's on red fabric.
Oh yeah, that's really cute.
I mean, we like aprons because they're pretty. We like them for their practical reasons. It's not like we're trying to be trad wives or anything, but a girl likes to protect her clothing sometimes.
Exactly. So wear what you like. And if you like poultry, wear those aprons. Oh, they're cute.
That's duck, salt, and pepper shakers. But I digress.
Okay, so go get yourself an apron, take a picture, put a story up, hit the mention button, hit us, and we'll give you a share. We want to see them. Okay, so should we tell everybody what we're going to be talking about next week?
Next week, we are spotlighting. I've been fascinated with this bird ever since the Ohio Nationals. I couldn't believe how cool they are. We are spotlighting the beautiful chameau.
Oh, yes.
Main topic, Jessie Watson, who is a longtime listener and friend of the show, she recently was awarded a Livestock Conservancy grant for her work breeding chameau chickens. They're very endangered. She's joining us to talk all about it. It's great stuff.
Can't wait.
Cracking the eggs is Irish apple cake, because how can you go wrong?
You can't.
And retail therapy, we're going to talk about the Livestock Conservancy, all the things they offer, and if you're not a member, why you should join.
That's right. You need to. Okay. So what should we tell everybody to do until next week?
Hug your chickens, ducks and geese and turkeys.
Every day and kiss them too. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you'd like to see more of us, please follow us on Instagram at Coffee with the Chicken Ladies. If you'd like to help us grow the podcast, please leave us a written review on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to become a patron of the show, please visit our Patreon page, patreon.com/Coffee with the Chicken Ladies. Thanks for listening.